A lot of you have asked about keeping you updated on the aquaponics system. A little bit wet out here, but I usually keep this indoors, but the light's better outside. So, and here we are. It's still pumping, and those turnips are here. And I went back and planted some rye. It's like, you know, the catcher in the rye. So this is rye. I planted it in here because I knew that rye grows well this time of year. It's a proven thing that I grow often as a cover crop. And that's why I wanted to grow it, because I'm well aware of its growth characteristics, and so I said if I put that in the system, I know exactly what it does. Now, let's just pull up and see what's going on. As you can see, we already have some roots here, very fine roots. The roots here are very hair-like roots, and they're coming out, a few coming out from the bottom now, and you may be able to see the goldfish far more clearly now, and they're doing much better. They're not as skittish as they once were, and you know, I haven't fed them yet because there's still a lot of ammonia in the system, and I think that just constantly having the pump on all the time, and now having the actual grass in here taking out some of the excess nitrogen, ammonia, you know, nitrogen that's in the ammonia and whatnot. And I've actually collected some data. I have a college professor friend who's probably watching, and so hope I can do him proud. I tried to collect data. I have a water sampling kit, and so I've taken the water every day except on Sundays. I usually, you know, I just don't do anything on Sundays. It's amazing to track the thing here. The pH has really been, you know, less than, the highest I've seen it was 7.4 in terms of the pH, and it's really stabilizing, starting to stabilize now about 6.8, which is ideal between, apparently, you know, the pH for the fish plus the pH for the plants. The best compromise is somewhere between neutral, which is 7, and down about 6.8. Anything, you know, the fish prefer something a little bit higher than that. The plants prefer something generally a little bit lower than that. But right around 6.8 to 7 on the pH scale is good. And so I've been tracking this for a little over a week now. Ammonia levels are far higher than 8 parts per million. And this is, apparently there's two kinds of ammonia, but ammonia is essentially nitrogen and hydrogen. Well, the nitrogen is what you want because that's what the plants want, but it's toxic for the fish. So we got to convert it into some various different forms, and there's a series of bacteria that convert the ammonia to nitrites and then on to nitrates. But the plants, you're trying to get it so that the plants can take out all that stuff, and it filters the water for the fish. And the water is looking very clear now, which is good. Water clarity is clear. Nitrite levels are just pretty constantly at about 5 parts per million. I may need to do a water change there. Ammonia levels are continuing to be high. But what's curious is since I planted the rye, the nitrate levels have severely dropped off. We were running 80 parts per million, but between 40 and 80 parts per million, depending on what I was doing with the pump. In general, when I had the pump on a timer, and I would only run it every 15 minutes every hour. That, you know, in general, when I would do that, the nitrates would be somewhere around about 80 parts per million. But when I just put it on a cycle, where it just continually, not a cycle, but when it continually runs, it usually drops to about 40 parts per million. Once I planted the rye and I had it consistently running, it went from, it spiked up the last time I tried to put it on the timer again, and it spiked up to about 80 parts per million. And then I put it back on a continuous pump where it just pumps all the time and never stops. And the rye started to sprout and set down roots and started coming up. It went from about 80 parts per million down to about 20 parts per million in about a day. And then the very next day, it went from 20 parts per million to 5 parts per million. So what that says is the plants are actually taking up the nitrogen, the nitrate here, the nitrogen oxygen here. And that's why I got wow. And I'm keeping this in a spreadsheet, notes, murky water, clogged pump, no major problems. Ammonia seems to be climbing higher than 8 parts per million. the scale just doesn't go past that. But I did a water change, got some water from the river. You know, pH down, was note that the pH was down. And within the spreadsheet that I have on the computer inside the house, what I do is I put a note, not just a little note here, but I really write a pretty descriptive thing about things that I've observed. And so I'm trying to keep a log of that every single day, just with this little system, so that when I go to try to build out the bigger system here, I'll actually have some experience and actually some data to actually help me. And so I added green sand here, and that pumped up the pH a little bit. I added some green sand and some rock phosphate to it from my organics here. Oop, just here in the rocks here, and I figured that that would help because the plants need far more than just nitrogen. They need a lot of things, and I know that organic fertilizer works, and it'll eventually just break down just while it's in here, just like that. And so as far as watering it evenly, I'm still just sort of manually kind of come in a few times a day, and I'll just kind of sprinkle it around like that, and it seems to do okay. Then I'll just set it back right there like that. And I usually keep this inside the house because this pump is not really rated for outdoor use. It's really just an indoor pump. And this system is a good sort of test system to kind of learn the thing, to you know, learn the fish habits. I haven't started feeding the fish yet, but the fish seem to have acclimated some, and they're not anywhere near as jittery, and they seem to be a lot, you know, more calm. But there we have. This is rye, and this will probably grow 4 feet tall. I don't know what I'm going to do. I may just keep cutting it like a big pet rock. But it's working. You know, it really is working. And the turnips are still down in there, and I've got some arugula down in there as well. But this time of the year, the only thing that I find that really grows incredibly well is something like this ryegrass. Because the other things, it's just really too late for them to really grow because it's just already getting cold. Herbs are still doing fine here. And so what I'm thinking of doing is really almost converting a lot of this stuff, a lot of my gardening, over to the aquaponics, because this stuff is working and I'm not having to do a whole lot of work and input. Just kind of like these buckets work really well. But may put a bypass valve to where it takes some of the fish water and waters these buckets, things like that. And I'm just interested in these systems that are going on. But anyway, that's a good update on the aquaponics system so far. And we're getting a good bit of data here, and that will help us later on. All right, check that out. It's Damon at greenhorngardening.com. Check it out, and I will talk to you guys later.